Thank you very much, Mr. President. Members of the Congress, ladies and gentlemen. Great pleasure for me to present to you today the report draft recommendation the observation of local elections in Ukraine, 31st of October 2010. I'll go into the organisation details of the mission covered fully in the report, and as you've already said, the mission was led by Mrs. Gudrun Mosler-Turnström from Austria, who's sitting next to me. I will instead concentrate on the fundamental points as the observer delegations saw them. The 22-page draft report containing comprehensive information about the election observation mission of the Congress in the Ukraine has been accessible online since March the 2nd. Mr. President, the Ukraine is a country with a great European history, which is once again taking its rightful place among the nations of Europe in accordance with the values, principles and standards of the Council of Europe. This makes it all the more all the more regrettable that my report shows that the local elections of the 31st of October 2010, in a significant number of respects, did not come up to these standards. By this I do not mean just the standards that the Congress's observer delegation wanted to see put into practice, nor the standards on which the Council of Europe insists, nor indeed the standards which the Ukraine had already set for itself and met, by which I mean the presidential elections in January and February 2010. So what are the most important points that I wish to mention? First, the new law on the conduct of local elections, adopted at the end of July 2010 and amended again at the end of August, just 2 months before the elections. In the observer delegation's opinion, an opinion which the Congress observers share with those of other international organizations such as the European Parliament and ODIHR, as well as with international observers and NGOs, media, diplomatic delegations and governments, and even representatives of the Ukrainian government whom we spoke to. This law was drafted far too hastily and therefore resulted in many problems, which then became evident before the election and on polling day itself. I shall now refer to the most fundamental shortcomings. The politically unbalanced composition of electoral commissions at every level, the impossibility of independent candidacies for the office of mayor, the brevity of the election timetable, the lack of training opportunities for commission members, and the overcomplicated vote counting procedure. Furthermore, this election law made it possible for candidates on the basis of questionable requirements to have their election candidacies cancelled at virtually the last minute. Members of the Congress delegation were able to observe how polling stations which had already opened were closed again at short notice because the local electoral commission suddenly received information about the cancellation of a certain candidacy. There were also allegations of malpractice with regard to the registration of candidates, including the cloning of opposition party branches, although in some cases this undoubtedly arose from genuine splits within those party organizations. Given the enormous importance of being top of a very lengthy ballot paper, there were allegations that opposition parties had found it impossible to achieve this almost anywhere in the country, in spite of all their efforts to be the first to register. In the interest of the careful preparation of legislative texts, the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe requires new electoral laws or amendments to existing electoral laws not to be introduced within the year preceding an election. The recommendation accompanying the draft report therefore includes a point relating to the timing of electoral legislation in accordance with the recommendations of the Venice Commission, and it invites the Ukrainian authorities to take the necessary steps to obtain the advice and expert opinion of the Venice Commission when drafting any new electoral laws, whether unified election laws we would like, or a new or amended special law on the conduct of specific elections, the next national election being due as early as next year. This is something to which I personally attach great importance, and I should like to send a message to the authorities in Ukraine to do themselves a favour and also accept the help offered to you by the Council of Europe. Perhaps I may come back to a few more examples from the draft report. We would like invitations to observe elections to be sent to international organisations at an earlier stage in future. We believe that it is absolutely necessary to publish election results in a central place within a reasonable period. And we draw attention to the fact, as previously on the occasion of earlier election observation missions of the Congress, that polling stations were not appropriately equipped for the elderly or persons with disabilities. We are aware that this is always a matter of resources as well, but it should not be left unmentioned. Many polling stations, particularly those in school classrooms, were too small for the number of voters, commission members and observers at peak times, leading to queuing inside and outside the polling stations and considerable delays in the voting process. In some places, these delays were exacerbated by a shortage of polling booths, causing considerable numbers of voters to mark their ballot papers wherever they could find a convenient place to do so, sometimes even on top of the ballot boxes themselves, and thereby seriously jeopardizing the secrecy of the vote. The number of ballot papers, between 5 and 7 according to locality, and the size of each one, owing to the multiplicity of candidates and parties, caused evident confusion, particularly among older voters. Finding the candidates and parties one wanted to vote for on each ballot paper was a difficult task in itself, and clearly this did not facilitate the democratic process. Finally, I should like to mention another 2 points relating to the broader sphere of the elections, but which are no less important from the viewpoint of the observer delegation of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities. First, the matter of press freedom and freedom of opinion in the Ukraine. We spoke to representatives of the media who expressed concern to us that the atmosphere had deteriorated for media workers. We share this concern and would like journalists in the Ukraine to be allowed to work freely and without restraint, and media pluralism to be guaranteed. In this context, we welcome the latest development, announced only in the last couple of days, that the judicial authorities in the Ukraine are taking positive action to bring to justice the suspected guilty party in the murder of the journalist Georgy Gongadze in the year 2000. Secondly, the general reform path, sketched out in broad terms, on which the Ukraine has embarked. On the basis of discussions and the information and impressions obtained by the Congress delegation during the pre-election and the actual election observation mission, we are convinced that the reform path will only be able to culminate in a successfully functioning democracy if the Ukraine, in all its projects, be it constitutional reform, new election laws, or efforts to strengthen local and regional democracy, which is of particular interest, of course, to us here in the Congress, allows transparency to prevail, includes the opposition, and also invites civil society to get actively involved. Mr. President, members of the Congress, the path to greater democracy is not always easy, but there is no acceptable alternative. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Myrmigan, and particularly thank you very much for keeping well within your time. I'm now very pleased indeed to welcome Mr. Brian Meany, who will make a statement on behalf of the Committee of the Regions of the European Union As you know, colleagues, we invite members from the COR to join us in these missions. Mr Meany is from Ireland, a member of Clare County Council and Midwest Regional Authority, and was nominated to speak at the session on behalf of the Committee of the Regions members. I'd also say that Mr Carey, our Irish member of the Bureau and head of the delegation, unfortunately has had to leave and apologises, but he does say he'll have a Guinness with you back home. Mr Meany, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, President, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of brevity, I won't need the 10 minutes, as I'm not going to replicate the statements already stated by the rapporteur. I want to thank you for the opportunity to report from the Committee of the Regions on the election monitoring mission to the Ukraine for the 2010 local elections. As you have stated, my name is Brian Meany. I'm a local and regional representative in Ireland. This was my first election monitoring mission, and I have to say that the learning curve was indeed very steep. There were 3 other members from the Committee of the Regions. Mrs Doreen Huddard, United Kingdom, member of Newcastle City Council; Mr Teet Kalasi, Estonia, member of Haapsalu City Council; and Mr Joseph Cordina, Malta, the mayor of Zagreb. The members agreed that Mrs Huddard would be the spokesperson for the group, but I know due to a speaking arrangement she has in Ireland this morning, she is unable to attend. Mr President, the members of the Committee of the Regions are grateful for the opportunity to participate in the Ukraine election observation mission. The cooperation with the Congress, as you have already stated, on such missions creates further ties between the Committee of the Regions and Congress. The Committee of the Region members would like to thank those who worked in preparing and organising, and we wish in particular to reference the excellence of the interpreters certainly provided to us in the areas that we visited. I wish to use this speaking opportunity just to highlight a number of points, and I hope not to repeat anything that has already been stated. First of all, I think it has to be realised we are short-term observers from the Committee of the Regions, and as such we acknowledge the difficulties in the legislation supporting this election, and it is felt strongly by the Committee of the Region that if trust is to be retained in the election process of democracy in Ukraine, the legislative difficulties have to be removed, and the legislators have to comply with the conditions detailed in the Vienna Agreement. In the voting centres, the members of the Committee of the Regions did note that all voting procedures were substantially followed in the voting in the areas that we were deployed to, but we also wish to note a number of points. The access for the elderly and disabled was non-existent in any of the voting centres that we visited. There was certainly quite visible inconsistent standards in sealing the ballot boxes, with different practices being engaged in by the heads of the Electoral Commission in the different polling booths we attended. The transparent ballot boxes, even though some people may cite them as a benefit, they certainly allowed the possibility to see how an individual voted if the ballot was not folded properly. And just to repeat one of the points, it's the complexity of the vote, the number of candidates, the number of ballot sheets. There was a substantial amount of voter confusion leading to delays. As a result, there was congestion, busy periods. Chairman, just on a final note to conclude, I think, participation in election monitoring missions has been a two-way process, and certainly it has given me an understanding of the value of having free, open and fair elections. Ladies and gentlemen, you may not have noticed, but there has been a revolution in Ireland. It's a quiet revolution that democratic processes allow. We've had the annihilation of 2 political parties because of the very draconian actions they've had to take over the last number of years. We've had a completely changed dynamic in relation to the political landscape in Ireland. This doesn't require 24-hour news coverage. It doesn't get attention. It's boring. But boring is what we need to achieve. And certainly, ladies and gentlemen, our value that we have in all democracies like Ireland and the 3 pillars that make up any democratic system, the pillars of free, open, fair and, I would say, frequent elections, respect for the rule of law and respect for human rights, certainly is something that I and the Committee of the Regions, in cooperation with the Congress, would certainly continue in participating in it into the future. Thank you very much, President.
Well, Mr. Meany, thank you very much for those remarks. We do very much welcome the participation of Committee of the Regions members in our missions. I thank you very much for the kind remarks that you made about the preparation and the organisation of the mission, which I know our Secretariat will be very pleased to hear. So we're very grateful you've been able to be with us to share your observations on this, I think, very important partnership working on these missions that we take forward. I'm now going to open the debate, colleagues. And first on my list, I have Mr. Mikhail Chernyshev from Russia. Mr. Chernyshev, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Спасибо, уважаемый председатель, уважаемые коллеги. Прежде всего, хотелось отметить большую работу, проведенную делегацией Конгресса совместно с членами Комитета регионов ЕС, а также поблагодарить докладчика Наджела Эрмакгена и высказать ряд соображений по представленным материалам. Несомненно, что выборные процессы являются лакмусовой бумагой демократии, а избирательное законодательство страны определяет путь ее развития. Поэтому очень важно, чтобы миссия Конгресса по оказанию содействия странам-членам Совета Европы в становлении евростандартов приносила свои видимые для населения результаты. Если сравнить доклады по Украине 2006 и 2010 годов, то, несмотря на признание определенного прогресса, достигнутого Украиной со времени предыдущего доклада, и в соответствии с рекомендациями 2006 года, объем и степень категоричной критики возросли, что невольно наводит на мысль о предвзятом отношении к нынешнему руководству Украины. Хочу сказать, что Украину и Россию связывают узы не только межгосударственного сотрудничества, но и межмуниципального сотрудничества. В 1998 году создана Ассоциация городов России и Украины. Сопредседателями этой ассоциации являются 2 города со стороны России: город Ростов, мэром которого я являюсь, со стороны Украины Донецк, мэр Лукьянченко Александр Алексеевич. Хочу сказать, что в эту ассоциацию сегодня входят 29 городов, и в последнее время она пополняется новыми членами. Ежегодно у нас проводятся международные выставки с участием широкого круга предпринимателей, обмен делегациями школьников, культурные фестивали, то есть идет постоянный процесс обмена опытом. И в том числе решаются такие важные задачи, как занятость, особенно характерная и сложная для региона Донбасса, кооперация в различных направлениях деятельности. И я хочу еще раз подчеркнуть, что здесь на протяжении более 10 лет идет такая определенная позитивная работа. Более того, буквально в этом году к этой работе присоединилась и региональные власти, и создан союз 3 территорий: Ростовской области со стороны России, Луганской и Донецкой со стороны Украины. То есть, уважаемые коллеги, Процесс становления демократии, вы сами понимаете, требует времени и созревания внутренних условий в той или иной страны и несет, как правило, определенные национальные особенности. Конечно же, не избежала его Украина. Поэтому вызывает сомнение правомерность давать столь резкие оценки соответствия нормам и требованиям Евросоюза относительно Украины. Да, Украина еще предстоит пройти достаточно длительный путь совершенствования местного и регионального законодательства в интересах местного населения, и этот путь она должна пройти самостоятельно по мере реализации внутренних реформ. В этой связи выглядит чрезмерным пункт по обязательному предварительному согласованию украинского избирательного законодательства со структурами Совета Европы, фактически наделяющий Венецианскую комиссию правом вето применительно к Украине. Конечно, мы очень уважаем рекомендации Венецианской комиссии, но думается, что напористость в этих вопросах и желание форсировать ход реформ на Украине могут спровоцировать нежелательный эффект, создав напряжение внутри страны. Еще раз хочу подчеркнуть, что Конгресс располагает богатым опытом оказания помощи и поддержки странам Совета Европы в становлении местного и регионального управления с учетом специфики и состояния развития той или иной страны. И этот опыт служит гарантией утверждения единых принципов развития Евросоюза. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much indeed. The next speaker on my list is from Russia again. Mr. Us, the floor is yours, please. Mr. Us. And if I could just ask speakers to try and be as brief as possible so I can get my whole list of speakers in. Otherwise, again, we could have a situation where not everyone can speak. Mr. Us, please.
Большое спасибо, господин председатель, за представленное слово. Я думаю, что вы относитесь с пониманием к тому, что российская делегация активнее принимает участие в обсуждении этого вопроса, поскольку Украина нам очень близка во всех отношениях. Я хотел бы буквально в нескольких словах акцентировать внимание на том, что сказал господин Чернышов относительно формулировки, предписывающей согласовывать избирательное законодательство с Венецианской комиссией. Сама по себе эта идея не вызывает никаких возражений, но формы, в которой это предписывается делать, фактически, на мой взгляд, как юриста, создает моральную и правовую базу для ограничения национального суверенитета. И это создает опасный прецедент для всех присутствующих здесь стран, и это выходит за пределы только украинских интересов. Поэтому мне представляется, что вот та формулировка в виде поправки, которая предлагает украинская делегация, а мы с ней знакомы, позволяет более цивилизованно, я бы сказал, интеллигентно снять эту важную проблему. Спасибо.
Mr. Us, my next speaker on the list, and again, I do crave indulgence to be brief, is Mrs. Natalia Romanova from the Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин председатель. Для нас сегодня очень важный день, потому что обсуждается доклад по мониторинговой миссии по местным выборам в Украине. И прежде всего я хотела бы выразить огромную благодарность мониторинговой группе, которая у нас была. И для того, чтобы не сложилось впечатление, что у нас одни сплошные недостатки, как могло это сложиться впечатление у присутствующих коллег в зале из выступления докладчика, я бы хотела прежде всего привести такие хорошие оценки, как то, что выборы в Украине прошли в целом спокойно и организованно, как то, что не было привлечено каким-либо проявлением системных нарушений внимания членов мониторинговой миссии. Я также чрезвычайно благодарна господину Мини, который тоже выразил общее мнение Комитета регионов о том, что в центрах голосования члены Комитета регионов согласились с тем, что все выборные процедуры были по сути соблюдены. И то, что сказано, что стандарты, которые хотела бы видеть мониторинговая группа и Конгресс Совета Европы, не такие высокие, мы расцениваем как аванс, как то, что нам еще многое предстоит сделать. И тем более в этом докладе оценивается очень высокий уровень тех стандартов, которые были заявлены на президентских выборах. Я сразу же хочу отметить, что впервые выборы в местные советы у нас были разведены с парламентскими выборами, и это создало определенный новый для нас объективный прецедент, объективные условия. Поэтому мы прекрасно понимаем, что нам необходимо в первую очередь совершенствовать законодательство. Но я уже на бюро выступая говорила о том, что наши 3 ассоциации местных и региональных властей еще до президентских выборов заявили, что существующая пропорциональная система не удовлетворяет наши регионы и муниципалитеты. Я вам больше скажу, 2 ассоциации требовали, чтобы в своем видении закона парламент в первую очередь учел мажоритарную систему. Об этом мы вместе приняли заявление на Конгрессе местных и региональных властей, который, я еще раз подчеркиваю, был создан еще до президентских выборов, и поэтому были проведены парламентские слушания. Да, мы понимаем, что закон был принят не с опозданием, что он не так совершенен, как хотелось бы его видеть, но с другой стороны, не ответить на требования 3 ассоциаций власть не могла. Кроме того, избирательный кодекс, которого ждут в Украине, он, безусловно, будет принят к следующим выборам. И я могу сказать то, что на сегодня идет активная работа в этом направлении, и мы думаем, что следующие парламентские выборы мы сможем встретить с новым избирательным законодательством. А кроме того, я хотела бы обратить внимание, что были проведены еще ряд таких существенных позитивных изменений. То, что были отменены блоки, и это позволило увидеть истинное лицо всех партий, которые принимали выборы. Кроме того, я могу отметить, что на сегодня мы имеем достаточно серьезную перспективу административно-территориальной реформы. И наша ассоциация нарабатывает эту концепцию, которая в ближайшее время будет законодательно утверждена. Я думаю, что новое избирательное законодательство должно учитывать и то, насколько будет изменен административно-территориальный облик нашей страны. Поэтому мы чрезвычайно благодарны за ту помощь, за ту серьезную оценку, которая прозвучала в докладе. И я думаю, что наша задача делать дружественные мониторинговые миссии, такие, которые бы стимулировали развитие демократии в стране. Поэтому я надеюсь, что вместе с нашими экспертами мы примем сбалансированную, правильную резолюцию, которая станет тем мостиком, который позволит совершенствование избирательной системы и в целом выборы в нашей стране. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much indeed. The next speaker on my list is Mrs. Mörsler-Turnström, please. The floor is yours.
Dear members of the Congress, as head of delegation, I really have the feeling I want to say something. And yes, you said it, democracy, you can't get democracy from today until tomorrow, not from one to another year. It takes time, but nevertheless, it's our mission to point out shortcomings and show up what we could do better. And Mrs. Romanova, we were in friendship in your country, and we see also progress. Let me say one thing. We were very glad about the invitation and your willingness, the willingness of the Ukraine authorities to let the Congress be part of the election. And it was the first time the territorial elections were held in your country exclusively without a national vote being carried out in the same time. In this respect, the Ukraine authorities took up the recommendation recommendations of the Congress from 2006, and we are very pleased about this. So please hear it, so we also see progress. But nevertheless, I would like to amplify some points of criticism. The law gave the governing parties a dominant position within the electoral commissions at all levels, exacerbated by a reduction in the quorum to only 3 on election day. This led to frequent allegations of malpractice in the functioning of these commissions. There were other things, as the rapporteur said, but despite of all these problems, one positive thing again, despite of the problems mentioned, the polling process throughout the country was generally conducted in a calm and orderly atmosphere. Unfortunately, the same could not be always said of the counting process. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Ukraine authorities and the members of the Ukraine delegation, I would like to conclude my statement and invite you once more and invite the Ukraine authorities to work jointly with the experts of the Council of Europe in the Congress and in the Venice Commission to achieve as quickly as possible the creation of an election code for the country to ensure, in particular, with the view of the next parliamentary elections in 2012, genuinely democratic elections fully in line with European standards for fair and free election. And I am convinced that we together in the Congress and you in Ukraine will take the steps forward. And I'm looking forward to the next election mission, and I'm sure we can put some more positive points out in here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Turnstrom. The final speaker on my list is again from the Ukraine, which is Mr. Ivan Kulichenko. The floor is yours, please.
Уважаемый господин председатель, уважаемые члены Конгресса, я 10 лет руковожу делегацией Украины в Конгрессе. Возглавляю эту делегацию. Я был вице-президентом Конгресса и хочу поблагодарить Конгресс за такое отношение к Украине. 6 конференций прошло в различных городах Украины под эгидой Конгресса. Это дало свою роль, и Конгресс хорошо узнали в Украине. Второе. Отметили, что выборы развели, это тоже было по предложению Конгресса. Сегодня парламентские и муниципальные выборы разведены во времени. Хочу поблагодарить миссию, которая работала в Украине. Действительно, МИД Украины предложил направить своих наблюдателей на выборы в местные советы, потому что нам очень важно мнение Конгресса и комитета. При этом, как руководитель Ассоциации городов Украины, и здесь находится руководитель Ассоциации региональных властей Украины, не могу не отметить то, что мы очень жестко настаивали перед Верховным Советом Украины и президентом Украины о изменении выборной системы. Украина – страна с молодой демократией. У нас более 200 партий. И список коротким не может быть в избирательном бюллетене. Жители Украины еще не структурировали свои симпатии к партиям Украины. Поэтому законодательство изменилось. Мы очень благодарны парламенту Украины, что выборы прошли по смешанной системе. 50% по партийным спискам и 50% избирателей избрали людей, которых не знают в лицо, по мажоритарной системе. Конечно же, это было и проблемой коротких сроков проведения выборов, и это было и проблемой того, что списки, избирательные бюллетени были длинными, конкуренция на мажоритарных выборах была очень большой, в среднем 15 претендентов было на один мандат, и, безусловно, людям, особенно пожилого возраста, было сложно выбрать из большого перечня партий и представителей мажоритарных, кого поддержать на выборах. Это же послужило и причиной долгого подсчета голосов. Мы очень благодарны за те предложения, которые сегодня высказаны. Мы понимаем, что кроме нас а комиссия, делегация Украины очень активно работает и здесь, в Конгрессе, и там у нас в Украине с представителями властей и парламента. И это и есть возможность создать мостик для того, чтобы процессы проходили и воспринимались идентично, что у нас, что в Конгрессе. Поэтому я еще раз прошу членов Конгресса обратить внимание, мы просим поддержать поправку о продолжении практики предоставления избирательного законодательства Украины в Венецианскую комиссию, что касается выборов в местные и региональные органы Украины. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much indeed for that contribution. We are very pressed for time in the debate. Mr. Mimmingham, did you wish to reply? Briefly, hope.
Very briefly, Mr. President. First of all, could I thank all the participants in the debate for the generally constructive remarks they made. But I have to mention the allegation of bias made by Mr. Chernyshov, which is frankly nonsense. I think Mrs. Romanova hit the nail on the head when she said, why should the Ukraine be treated differently from other nations? We accept that the Ukraine now is a mature democracy. This was exemplified by the fact that there was a peaceful change of national government and president just at the beginning of last year in an electoral process which worked extremely well. And therefore I see no reason for Ukraine to be treated any differently from any other democracy. And when we make criticisms, they're made in a constructive way. And it would be patronizing to somehow treat the Ukraine as if it was still only an emerging democracy. I think it's much further along the road than that, as has been shown. Those are the only remarks I wanted to make at this moment, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. Mimmingham. Colleagues, now we come to consideration of the draft resolution and the draft recommendation. First, we will consider the resolution. This is contained in document CG 27. No amendments have been tabled, so we will now vote on the draft resolution. Would those in favour please raise their hands? Thank you very much. Those against, please to raise their hands. I see no one. Any abstentions? I see none. So the resolution is carried unanimously. Can we now consider the draft recommendation? This is contained in document CG 27. One amendment has been tabled by Mr. Volodymyr Udovichenko. I also understand that Mr. Udovichenko wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment which changes the wording of his amendment. In accordance with Rule 26.2 of our Rules of Procedure, I have decided that this sub-amendment is indeed in order. Therefore, Mr. Udovichenko, could you take the opportunity both to speak to the original amendment and to also explain the new wording contained in the sub-amendment? When you've finished, I will invite other speakers on the sub-amendment before putting that to the vote, and then we will put the original amendment to the vote. Mr. Udovichenko, having said that, you have the floor for 1 minute. The floor is yours.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Итак, пункт 11. И мы предлагаем в окончательном варианте слова «представлять проект Объединенного избирательного кодекса или любого иного нового отдельного» и дальше по тексту на слова, которые более приемлемы и имеют следующую формулировку. Продолжить практику представления избирательного законодательства и дальше по тексту. Итак, поправка сейчас будет иметь следующий вид. Продолжить практику представления избирательного законодательства в отношении местных и региональных выборов в Украине на заключение Венецианской комиссии Совета Европы до принятия этих законопроектов парламентом. И при этом хотел бы привлечь внимание, что Венецианская комиссия уже проводила оценку проекта избирательного кодекса Украины в 2010 году. Спасибо за внимание. Прошу поддержать.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ivichenko. Does anybody wish to speak against this sub-amendment? I see no members to speak against. Does the rapporteur have an opinion? Mr. Murmigan?
Yes, Mr. President, to avoid the necessity of a vote, I've studied the amendment, and although I'm sorry to lose the reference to the Unified Electoral Code, I don't think it substantially changes the spirit of the recommendation, and I'm prepared to accept the amendment as amended.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I therefore see those who are for the sub-amendment please to raise their hands? Thank you very much. Those who are against the sub-amendment, please raise your hands. I see none. Are there any abstentions? I see not one. Well, I see one. So the sub-amendment is agreed. Now we turn to the original Amendment 1, as we've just amended by the sub-amendment. Mr. Yudovichenko has already spoken to the amendment. Is there a member who wishes to speak against this amendment? I see no one. Rapporteur, do you have an opinion? You've accepted the amendment. So now I will put the amendment to the vote. Those who are in favour, would you please raise your hands and show? Thank you very much indeed. Those who are against, please show. I see none. Any abstentions? I see one. The amendment is therefore agreed. Now we need to vote on the draft recommendation as we have just amended it. Can I see those who are in favour of the draft recommendation as amended to show? Please raise your hands. Thank you very much. Those who are against? I see none. Abstentions? I see none. Therefore, the draft recommendation as amended is adopted. So, thank you very much. Can I congratulate the rapporteur on his work and declare that adopted. Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the 20th session of the Congress is now coming to a close. It took place at a time of major developments on the world scene, and I'm proud to say that the Congress rose to the occasion and the challenges that these developments represent. The session showed our capacity to respond to the crucial issues of the day, be it the changes in the Arab world, the need to protect our cities from natural disasters, the situation of the Roma, or the broader question of human rights at local and regional level. This session also showed that we are on the right track with Congress reform, focusing its action on improving the situation in our communities through better implementation of the European Charter of Local Self-Government, through raising the quality of local and regional governance, and through promoting human rights at the grassroots level, as well as on addressing the major challenges faced by our local and regional authorities. During the session, we have had a chance to further discuss this reform process in the context of the broader reform of the Council of Europe. We heard from the Presidency of the Committee of Ministers and Secretary General Jagland, who gave their full support to our efforts. Finally, the session showed a measure of success in building partnerships for our common cause, both within the Council of Europe and across the continent. We've had the opportunity to exchange views with the Commissioner for Human Rights, the President of the Venice Commission, the Director of the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union, and the EU Commissioner for Regional Policy, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Roma issues, and the Deputy Director of the United Nations Strategy for Natural Disaster Reduction. Colleagues, these partnerships only strengthen the resolve of the Congress to pursue its action for advancing local and regional democracy and building inclusive and sustainable communities marked by cultural diversity and harmony. Our contribution to living together in a 21st century Europe. This session was an inspiration for us to move forward, so let us seize this moment and, as Secretary General